Yay. This was actually part of my project on Zonhetler, actually, initially, because I started as an anti-Althusserian from the Brazilian tradition of José Arthur Gianotti, who wrote 1967 against Althusser. I was hoping to be able to talk about him, but I usually don't like to talk about something that is only in Portuguese and not translated and nobody knows about it, and won't be able to challenge me in anything that I would say about it, so it's kind of an easy game. So I just switched it to a direct comparison between Althusser and Sellars, because Gianotti was the one who was actually the kind of the Sellars to my Althusser, right? But now it's just Sellars. Sellars and Althusser. How shall I change this? I don't have the clicker there. Where's the clicker? Oh, this is the thing. Is this? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so basically the problem there was that there's a bunch of problems with usually people think of Althusser as having a kind of difficulty with the duality between ideology and science. So I was trying to compare this to Sellars. There is a very easy comparison between ideology and the manifest image and science and the scientific image. It's kind of obvious. Everybody goes there. But I think this is wrong, and for a number of reasons. And my wager is that I can use some Sellarsian kind of resources to either illuminate Althusser or make it or kind of make more continuous the discontinuities that is part and parcel of Althusser's account, and that makes it difficult to for some critics to think about kind of a practical political practical purview to Althusser's kind of thinking. And by the end, there is also a corrective that Althusser would kind of lend to the Sellarsian picture. We've been talking here, it's the second day of the conference, we'll be talking a lot about norms, but my point will be exactly to kind of also valorize in Sellars the causal aspect of pattern-governed behavior that is also very important if you are going to build a kind of, I think, an interface with Marx and Marxist school of thought and Marxian thinking. So, again, sorry.
Oh, I think it didn't screen.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. It'll now work.
Yeah. Okay. See. So the first I want to rehearse this. This is kind of the the difference between just again the plan of presentation. So I was going to talk a little bit about the manifest and scientific image, but Carl just did so I think we can skip that. And then the effective problem of cognitive mapping, which will be the field the test field for this problem, this comparison between Althusser and Sellars, that comes from Jameson's paper about that. And the function of ideology that also Jameson is assigning to cognitive mapping, which is not just the function of Marxist science, but specifically Althusserian ideology, which is interesting also. So, and then we'll have to revisit what is theoretical practice for Althusser and the problem of the real object. So there's this kind of split between the object of knowledge and the real object in theoretical practice. Then a Sellarsian solution, which will kind of weave pattern-governed behavior and world pictures, and then we'll go back to cognitive mapping and what does this Sellarsian solution kind of bring to the concept of ideology in Althusser, and what the concept of ideology in Althusser bring to the world pictures as a Sellarsian would understand, kind of politicizing these world pictures in a certain way. So you have like the two kind of most important, I think this is Robert Brandam's choice for representing kind of left and right Sellarsian tendencies. The one that is focused in developing the space of reasons, like in characterizing an episode or a state as that of knowing. We are not giving an empirical description of that episode or state. We are placing it in the logical space of reasons, of justifying and being able to justify what one says. And the second one, which is the ciência mensura principle in the dimension of describing and explaining the world. Science is a measure of all things, of what it is that it is, and what is not that it is not. So the problem there is a kind of clash for those who most of us know about this clash of having as Carl already revisited, kind of a scientific framework out of the descriptive resources of language that are normatively laden, but they are descriptive in that sense, that scientific sense, where you don't get to have a self-regulating, autonomous, rational agent that is doing the postulation. So you have, from the side of the manifest image, basically our correlational kind of nomologicals that we use, and from and out of the resources, the logical resource of the manifest image, grows this scientific image that, in a sense, it is dependent upon postulational entities. You have to postulate entities to explain that which appears in the manifest image. But this creates this split, right? Which is where most people that will work on Althusser and Sellars will kind of look for the comparison. Sorry, again.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm getting the gist of it. Yeah. So Jameson, the problem of cognitive mapping. The problems of figuration that concerns us may be conveyed by way of a growing contradiction between lived experience and structure, or between a phenomenological description of the life of an individual and a more properly structural model of the conditions of existence of that experience. Too rapidly, we can say that while in older societies and perhaps even the early stages of market capital, the immediate and limited experience of individuals is still able to encompass and coincide with the true economic and social form that governs that experience. In the next moment, these two levels drift ever further apart and really begin to constitute themselves into that opposition the classical dialectic describes as Wesen and Erscheinung, essence and appearance, structure and lived experience. So this is a basic problem that Jameson was putting in the 80s in this address that he gave at the University of Illinois, I think, about what is our capacity to encompass social reality that is too complex and at a completely different scale from that which we have, to which we have a kind of more kind of immediate access. So our lived experience is not up to task to figure the complexity of the social whole. So here you have another kind of imbalance, like between a kind of the necessity of a certain kind of scientific framework that will be able to retrieve and make that complexity kind of manifest to the cognitive subject, and our kind of immediate resources of, cognizing that are not up to task, really. So at first, as I just said, we would be inclined to think that this is the kind of necessity for a certain form of science, a certain form of science of the totality, of the social totality, right? But for Jameson, it is ideology in the Althusserian sense that will be able to connect because ideology in the Althusserian definition of ideology, which is the imaginary relationship between individuals and their concrete conditions of existence, that will be able to make the bridge between that complexity and that place of lived experience within this complexity. In a certain sense, this echoes the problem of the place of the cognitive subject in the scientific image. That is the Sellarsian problem as well. So on theoretical practice from the Althusserian sense, like basically, I'm gathering this from two different texts, like on the materialist dialectic from the For Marx in 1968, and in reading Capital, he has this kind of, which is also an interesting comparison to have with Sellars, this attack on what he thinks is a kind of empiricist conception of knowledge. So he says, the empiricist conception of knowledge presents a process that takes place between a given object and a given subject. Empiricist abstraction, which abstracts from the given real object its essence, is a real abstraction, leaving the subject in possession of the real essence. Here, real abstraction is not the real abstraction that John Hattel is talking about, right? Actually, there are at least two at least two kind of important places where you can pit what Althusser thinks is a real abstraction with the Zonhatteli one, which is Alberto Toscano's essay from 2008, The Open Secret of Real Abstraction, where he says you can't really countenance something like real abstraction for Althusser because this real abstraction is only comes to thought. It is only the result of a thought process, right? So, but anyway, here he's being critical of the concept of real abstraction in the sense of this empiricist kind of abstraction where the abstraction is real because it's part of the object. So you have this face-off between subject and object, which are immediately present, and you get to discover the essence of the object as real part of the object. And he wants to go against it, right? Against that idea. I said two places. The other one was Zizek, the sublime object of ideology. He says, like, we don't really have access to real abstraction in the Zonhattelian sense from the Althusserian point of view. But this is just aside, just because we are discussing Zonhattel before. So, and then here is his description of what is his proposal. That is different from this just kind of immediate relationship to an object that retrieves from the object its essence, which is the idea that you are working out of previous kind of generalities or previous kinds of scientific materials or scientific materials that have become ideological materials. So the work whereby generality1 becomes generality3, that is abstracting from the essential difference that distinguish generality1 and generality3, whereby the abstract becomes the concrete, only involves the process of theoretical practice. That is, it all takes place within knowledge. Here he mentions the abstract becoming the concrete. He's also making a reference to Marx, the idea that the concrete is the synthesis of multiple abstractions, right? So you must have a correct kind of scientific point of view, scientific concepts in order to retrieve the concreteness that is actually to be constructed out of the abstractions through which we will filter that which appears in a certain sense. So there's this kind of filtering process that works on previous materials that are not immediate materials of experience, but are materials that are part of the ideology or part of current scientific knowledge that is elaborated through what he calls a generality², which is usually a state-of-the-art kind of theory to generality3. What is important here in the relationship with Sellars is exactly that. The fact that in Sellars you have also the kind of development of different images out of previous images, and you are always already dealing with images. And here you are always already dealing with certain preconceptions of the practice that you are doing. So it's also connected with practice. But Althusser stresses in the consequence of his construal the fact that the object of knowledge is not a part of the real object as in the empiricist picture, like an essence living behind the veil of its appearance, but is a new object constituted within theoretical practice and existing for knowledge or for thought. So what is the connection between, here's his diagram. This is from Marx de Van Hegel, I think, which is, I mean, one of the few examples that he gave of a kind of empirical example of generalities. Like he thinks that Marx's science basically is the application of a generality², which is Hegel's framework to Ricardian economics and French socialism. So he thinks that, yeah, he applies Hegel to Ricardo, and this is it yields as a result Marx. So this is kind of funny, but anyway, it's very schematic. But anyway, I was stricken by this graph because I was always thinking exactly what kinds of example he had in mind between generality1, 2, and 3. Anyway. And then what's the nexus between the real and the theoretical object? What is interesting here is to note the structural similarity between the accounts of Althusser and Sellars of scientific practice. Both are critics of the given in the sense of objects of direct experience that would be capable of yielding an intrinsic concept or category directly to knowledge, as Carl was saying, like an object, a kind of impression that comes with its own categorical seal already. Both uphold the historical existence of constituted sets of theoretical resources that, in some sense, offer putatively complete explanation, albeit less adequate ones, from the point of view contemporaneous to the working scientist. So you have a plethora of different kind of explanations, and you are working through from these materials more than from the direct experience. Both understand the processual character of the scientific enterprise as a transformation of those materials of the previous images of generalities. So yeah, so this is the processual character has to do with the kind of refinement of these either images or generalities if you switch one from the other. Until now I'm still in the kind of familiar kind of face-off comparison, one-to-one comparison between Althusser and Sellars, just to establish what is a kind of continuity whereby we can adjudicate what is different in each other and what they can bring to each other to build a kind of a more interesting common framework. But both pictures also carry a price, which is a divorce between concept and fact, reasons, the space of reason, the space of causes, or between ideology and science. At least this is one criticism that we hear a lot about, justified or not, but it is one criticism. It yields this impression that is kind of this connection. So what's the nexus between the real and the theoretical object? This is one question. Yeah, again, sorry. So what's the result of theoretical praxis? This is the other critique. This is a diagram that comes from a paper that's forthcoming called, what's the name? Convex mirror in a self-portrait, which is kind of John Ashbery mangled, the title. So yeah, this is a kind of the graph of theoretical practice that I'm proposing. There's no generality there, but the idea is that you have an ideological situation. The ideological situation already contains conception and practice. So our normal situation, you don't have the separation between practice and conception in a metaphysical sense. We are always dealing with a kind of a cluster that has with it its own conception. Though this is ideology in a certain sense. So this is the ideological situation. The conception represents a practice in a certain way, from a certain standpoint, right? And you develop the conception into a different thing. Here, somewhere here, you have generality² coming in to give a different kind of conception. This conception redescribes the practice, and then this transforms into. This is a dotted line because it's unclear to me. Anyway, in this paper, there are certain rules for the graphs, but the dotted line is, whenever it's unclear what is the result, I'll use the dotted line. So this, in a certain sense, for Althusser, this should inform political practice, right? But how does it inform, and what kind of mereology is coming through with the advent of Marxist science and its and the way Marxist science will be informing socialist ideology and transforming a certain kind of practice into another practice. So, yeah, this is also a picture that we see a lot about the Althusserian framework. So, a Sellarsian solution to that. So, well, in some reflections of language games, Sellars is talking about language as a game that is determined by certain rules, right? And there he starts from the paradox of rules. If you have a certain rule, and language is a game that's obeying rules, then you might have a rule, you might have to have a rule to explain how to apply that rule in the meta-language. So there's a meta-language with the rules, and then there's a meta-language with the rules for the rules. And this is infinite regress. So Sellars proposes that no, this can't be really the way language comes about. It has to have a kind of a causal infrastructure, which is a pattern-governed behavior, which is not really a full-fledged set of rules or a full-fledged kind of language, right? So pattern-governed behavior exemplifies an abstract pattern or a part of a pattern, not as an instance of a causal law, as a mere happenstance, nor as a result, of self-consciously obeying a rule. This kind of complex behavior cannot be individuated, except in terms of its place within an abstract pattern. Sellars' favorite example of pattern-governed behavior, this is from Meredith Williams, by the way, a book that I like a lot, which is called Blind Obedience. Sellars' favorite example of pattern-governed behavior is the dance of a bee that communicates the location of a field of nectar-bearing flowers. The particular movements of the bee are part of a complex dance, not accidentally, but essentially. They are performed because they are part of the dance. But this is done without a conception of the dance, without a set of instructions for how to perform it. So you have like the revolutionary reinforcement. You have to tell a story about a certain evolutionary reinforcement and the niche advantages of behaving in a certain way. And this is why you have like this necessary path of contingent, but retroactively necessary path once we want to explain actuality of how these behaviors come to be in a certain sense. So it's not really norms all the way down in a certain sense. There is a pattern-governed activity. This is very important, I think. For now, what we must keep in mind is the causal dimension. There's something, I don't remember what I wrote there. Let me see. Okay, sorry. For now, what we must keep in mind is the causal dimension of pattern constitution that is implicit in the Sellarsian category, and the resources that are called upon the vantage point of normal being language use is describing these patterns. We are at the heart of the issue. So the problem is we are always already within the norm-obeying language, but norm-obeying language can be the whole story. So we have to have like this infrastructure, but that will be described from the point of view of norm-obeying language. Though Althusserians might be able to recognize here the idea that science is performed out of ideology, even though it is science, so you are always in ideology. What is the concept of ideology here? So Sellars further distinguishes between types of transitions in the game of full-fledged language. Now full-fledged language capable of scientific description. Besides language entry transitions, which are typically perceptions of objects outside language, and language exit transitions, which are typically actions in the world beyond thought and speech. There are intra-language transitions, which are inferences, that type of move that enacts permissible connections between sentences. Therefore, those moves that are kind of enacting the rules in the meta-language. And Sellars will use meta-language here as a form of parlance to talk about, it's almost like if you consult a certain book of permissible moves that you assign then to the objects their modal properties, for instance. So those are distinguished from to cut a long story short, material inferences are central for the Sellarsian picture of language. So materials inferences are codifying a certain world picture, right? Those are distinguished from formal inferences that result from a logical form of sentences, such as all A's are B's, all B's are C's, therefore all A's are C's. These are formal because you can replace A, B, and C for anything. It's not part. The logical structure is not embedded in the meaning of the singular term, the contribution that the singular term is making to the sentence. Material inference, on the other hand, are the inferences that result from the contribution of the meaning of the singular terms to the sentence conjoined, such as if there is fire, there is smoke. It pertains to the concept of fire that it may produce, not necessarily, but may produce smoke. How is it that these connections come to be established as rules of language if they are fundamentally the result of observation? So you have like this kind of induction problem there, like I've seen smoke come out of fire n number of times, but how can I know that it will be like that? So so for him, like there is a kind of infrastructure of rules that keep in check the modal properties that we assign to objects. So actually, those modal properties that some kind of substance is capable of producing some kind of reaction are codified in a normative language that says it is permissible from a sentence containing the first substance to conclude a sentence containing the consequent, right? And here's like, it's a kind of beautiful diagram that he puts in some reflections on language games, comparing the no chess language, that is the language that is about the shapes, empirical shapes of pieces of chess, and the chess language, and between chess and the world of fact, to just dramatize the fact that you are inside a certain logical, rule-bound system And in this rule-bound system is kind of read off and reading off certain components of the empirical world and assigning to those components certain moves. So this is a kind of illuminating comparison between the assignment of modal properties and the endorsement of certain rules of connection between antecedents and consequence in the language. So nevertheless, as we shall see, the full flavor of actual modal discourse involves the way in which sentences in the first level language game containing modal words, parallel sentence containing the rule world, may, ought, permitted, etc., in the syntactical meta-language. This parallelism is quite intelligible once one notes that the moves which are signalized in the object language by sentences containing modal words are enjoined, permitted, etc., by sentences containing rule words in the syntactical meta-language. So what is that? This is constituting a kind of world picture. So world picture this is kind of my scribbles. I did a bunch of diagrams this morning, sorry. So I didn't have the time to properly digitalize them. But anyway, you have like a space of norms. Patterns are there as an infrastructural element of norms. Norms are causally reducible to patterns, but not logically reducible, because the logic that is part and parcel of the normatively articulated world picture is not causal by itself. Its central concept is the concept of reason for something instead of simply a cause, right? So, and then you get the transitions and natural space. Anyway, there's a kind of linguistic patterning going on that is also part of the infrastructure of the normative space. So for Sellars, and here we might approach an answer that may be valid for Althusserian ideology. Material inferences are codified by modal vocabulary that state possible affairs that might obtain in connection to what the singular terms are referring to. It comes down to the language to keep in check what is accepted as valid inferences that are reflected in the assignment of modal properties to the terms that picture the real objects. It is in that sense that the theoretical object is always different from the real object. So it kind of illuminates the difference in Althusser as well. As the result of the process by which observation and language come together in the assignment of inference tickets that enable to track the behavior of the putative real objects being referred to. These are world pictures produced by language, out of which comes the crystallizations that Sellars calls manifest and scientific images. We must also keep in mind that these are acts built upon an infrastructure of pattern dispositions. This will be crucial for another side of the problem stated, which can now be stated in Sellarsian terms as, what is the connection between world pictures and real objects? At one point was, what's the connection between the theoretical object and the real object? Now it's, what's the connection between world pictures and real objects? Note that for now we are only dealing with scientific descriptions, but the normatively laden character of the descriptive language just proposed might brought to bear on another Althusserian motif, which is ideology. So on ideology. In On Reproduction, Althusser engages more thoroughly with the problem of ideology. He enunciates two interesting theses. First one we have already encountered is that ideology is the imaginary relationship between individuals and their conditions of existence. Second one is the object of our concern now. Ideology has a material existence. This is very striking from Althusser. Coming downstream from Gramsci, here I'm quoting from the paper that you sent to me, Roberts. I'll comment upon that a little later. That Roberts connects Althusser's conception of ideology with Gramsci's. So coming downstream from Gramsci, Althusser's conception of ideology as material emphasizes not the ideal element in a seeing filtered through so-called ideological lenses, but the practical dimension of ideology. His theory of interpellation tries to connect the constitution of a subject as a locus of actions that are determined by the ideological state apparatus, the juridical, religious, political, etc., determined by the concrete institutions and visible from the point of view of the reproduction of the conditions of capital. So for Althusser, it's not so much ideology as false consciousness simply, but ideology as a set of practices that are determined by these social spheres, these institutions, the juridical, the religious, the political, the economical, and all of that, right? So you get to see yourself acting as if those, let us call them, normative fields are asking for, in a certain sense. But are these just normative fields simpliciter, like they are only normative fields? So here's Althusser's quote. Let us take the shortest way and see what goes on in the individuals who live in ideology, that is, in a determinate representation of the world, religious, moral, and so on, whose imaginary distortion depends on the imaginary relation to their conditions of existence. In other words, in the last instance, to the relations of production. Ideology equals an imaginary real relation to real relations. We shall say that this imaginary relation is itself endowed with material existence. So ideology is a constraint on the possible action space of individuals. This is kind of one of my theses here that I take from this mix between Sellars and Althusser. If we are always in world pictures, those world pictures are not just world pictures that we want to be in. They are world pictures constrained by, you know, the ideological apparatus. So here again, the Roberts, by the end of his paper, mentions Kukla's comparison of ideology as being normative facts and science being empirical facts, which I think is wrong, actually. So here's William Clare Roberts, just published a couple of weeks ago. Althusser's distinction between ideology and science is analogous to Wilfrid Sellars' distinction between normative facts and empirical facts. Kukla, whose attention to the similarities between Sellars and Althusser is groundbreaking, notes that empirical facts for Sellars are in a sense always normative, all the way down, in the sense that they can make determinate authoritative claims on us only when we take them as normatively related to other facts. Okay. This is analogous to Althusser's claim that there is no practice, including obviously scientific practice, except by and in an ideology. And yet Sellars wants to distinguish normative from empirical facts, and Althusser wants to distinguish ideology from science. As Kukla clarifies, to state a normative fact is not merely to describe a state of affairs, but rather to make a set of demands. But ideology, for Althusser, is not a set of demands exactly. A demand is part of ideology, right? So the Sellarsian picture makes it so that ideology is here different from science than it is for Althusser. The interpolative function, or the embeddedness of language in practical life, is part and parcel of the habits necessary to critique the same habits appearing as they are within putatively correct descriptive frameworks. Ideology is not only the set of normative facts in distinction to empirical facts, as Kukla and Roberts state. In a sense, this is to reduce ideology to rules of action. You ought to do A and B, which is interpolation, right? Ideology is also the rule of criticism associated with a certain practice, which enjoins one to make it so that A is in B. It's not do A and B, which is the rule of action, but there's the rule of criticism for Sellars that has to do with the imperative to make it so that the state of affairs is such that A is in B. So there is a kind of, it begets an image. It's not only a set of demands, it begets an image of the world, a world picture exactly, where A has to be in B. It's part of world picture's empirical yet normatively laden content. The Althusserian contribution to cognitive mapping is here the way ideology is concretized through the specific practice determined by institutions, striate the space of possible actions, like it cuts the space of possible actions. The concrete side of ideology constitutes a patterning of patterns with a normative obverse. The abstract side is the resulting world picture. So here's this morning horrible scribble. Yeah, like that was the comparison that Kukla and Roberts make between Sellars and Althusser. Empirical facts are for science as normative facts are for ideology, and it is so, but empirical facts are also normatively articulate, and this also for the idea that science is produced from within ideology. This is kind of the rationale behind it, but I think it's limited, and this is, I think, yeah, the last scribble, which is kind of this striated space of ideological state apparatus that makes it so that here you are a religious person, here you are a juridical person, here you are economical person, etc., 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 and each one has, as I was doing with my other graph, the good one. Where's the good one? Yeah, an ideological situation where you have already the practice and the conception, the two poles. So here it's the same pair for each kind of ideological field, which is patterning the space of possible action. and science retrieves their composition. The problem of science is that we want to retrieve, and of cognitive mapping is that we want to retrieve the composition of these local fields of action that are created by the ideological state apparatus if you want to use Althusserian framework. And this might have to inform a different kind of ideology, which will be the task of cognitive mapping, taking this science that retrieves the composition of these localized frameworks into a way to adjudicate what is to be done, basically. It has to put you inside the picture of a kind of socialist, communist ideology that will be answering to this kind of science. So on cognitive mapping again, from the point of view of both patterns and norms, this is from the real abstraction of the given, my paper from 2023. From this vantage point, we can at least sketch a possible relationship between that, which is the pattern. Here, the real pattern corresponds to what we call the capitalist mode of production, and the diverse behaviors and local norms the pattern may constitute. In a sense, the concept of socially necessary illusion ideology is here retained and recast as a mismatch between the way a certain operational scheme functions, the subject of which is not us, but the valorization of value itself and the way it appears to us as agents that are feeding the scheme. So the form of appearance, of course, this is Marxism 101, is different from the way the thing is. There's a non-identity between the operational scheme of capital and the norms of the game of exchange as it appears to us. But this non-identity is not complete. They are not separate, completely separate. A partial covering of one pattern by the other makes them locally compatible while not being identical. So you have to retrieve the relationship between these patterns. That was it.
Thank you so much. I have an objection, though. I mean, the norms that comes from the capitalist mode of production are social norms, and that wouldn't be norms in the Sellarsian terms.
No, they will be. I have an answer for that. There will be restriction on norms.
And my other objection is whether the Althusserian ideology could be corresponded to the normative realm of the Sellarsian normative realm.
Yeah,
ideology is something that comes from the social conditions, and science comes from ideology through a rapture in Althusser. So science corresponds to the normative realm in the Sellarsian terms, and ideology corresponds to the empirical facts, because it comes from, it is explained by the social milieu.
No, I disagree with that. I have my own. No, I disagree with that. I mean, I thought of that solution as well, but actually I was actually criticizing the fact that there's a double thing there. I think you are perhaps assigning to me the view that ideology is the normative facts and science is the empirical facts. I was criticizing that. I don't think ideology is normative facts, and I don't think science is empirical facts. But I don't think it's the opposite, which is what you are proposing, that the normative facts are science and the empirical facts are ideology. I think both ideology and science are certain sets, cluster of determinations that come from patterns, both patterns and norms. So your first question was if kind of an ideology is a social norm or something like that. It ends up being a social norm. So it ends up being a norm. But it is a restraint, is a constraint in the possible normative space. And here I'm feeding on what Justin have been doing about the space of reasons, the fact that the space of reasons is not as free as we think it is. So if you want to build, and this is kind of the proposition here in this conference, to build a fruitful kind of relationship to Marxism, I think we have to take into account the causal dimension of determination by interest and by the circuits, the historical materialist kind of circuits of determination that restrain locally the space of possible action. And the space of possible action are read off in the in the Pittsburghian kind of framework out of clusters of patterns and norms. Therefore, practice and conception, as I was using in my graph. Yeah.
Quick follow-up.
Unfortunately, we don't have very much time for questions. So if we do have another question in the room, that would be good to give that opportunity. Okay.
I was hoping for a question from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, JP. Really, I'm very sympathetic to some kind of articulation of the relationship between Althusserian and a pragmatist outlook. Yeah. And it's easy to get the wrong idea about what that relationship would be. But what I wanted to ask is, but then don't we lose the nice thing about that simple chopping up, that kind of division of labor, the conceptual division of labor between
science and ideology.
Yes, and assigning them very easily to the normative, and is that then we have to start to think about then it makes the concept of ideology indifferent to the distinction. Then we need a second order notion of the articulation within the ideological between the scientific and the ideological, or something along those lines. Or what is the precise articulation then within the ideological, which of course is, science is a mode of the ideological in this picture, but then what precisely is the articulation? And it's related to a second question I have, which is, just very quickly, you talked about cognitive mapping at the beginning, and obviously Jameson, this notion of that it would provide some kind of articulation of the relationship between lived experience and structure. And that, again, if you don't give a precise articulation in this way, it loses. You lose the ability. It should have that kind of role. And what would that look like on this picture? I don't know.
I see. I think.
Thank you.
Very good points. First of all, science. Maybe there was a part that I skipped that was part of the presentation, but then it didn't got in. Science for Sellars has to do with the postulation of entities in a certain sense. So it kind of supersedes the immediate in that sense. One way of parsing out the problem of a cognitive map in that sense is to kind of transform these methodological entities, such as class, for instance, into substantive ones, like treat them as if they are substantive. See ourselves as members of a class, as we see a table as an assemblage of atoms. So you have to, in a certain sense, science modulates our ways of seeing in a certain sense. And my way of parsing, maybe this is very different from what Althusser wants, but anyway, it's what I'm trying to kind of make this crossing between them and see what comes out of it. I would say something to that extent that for Sellars, there's no, once you get into the game of redefining your world pictures, there's no privileged scale. So maybe the scientific point of view will be the point of view that tries to retrieve the structural connections and put yourself in that structural connections in the sense of a kind of a tactical, strategical kind of thinking. Because you have like a picture of how these different world pictures connect, and world pictures seen as the result of these ideological state apparatus from the point of view of reproduction. So of course I'm not answering as I think in the general sense that you want like what is science as such, but I'm answering within this framework. What is the science of Marxism and what is the ideology of Marxism if we use the resources of both Althusser and Sellars to illuminate what is the relationship between subject and structure, which is the problem of cognitive mapping. Yeah, is that okay?